This is our brief agenda, so I'm just going to talk for a few minutes and then I'll introduce our panelists or our presenters. We're going to break it up into two kind of separate sessions. So Farm Commons is going to speak, and then we'll do a little Q&A session with Chloe, and then we'll have Caesar from Department of Labor and Industries talk about the Farm Internship Program and have a second Q&A session. I know a lot of your questions are probably not going to get answered today. I have some extra time at the end I can stay on and do my best, and then also follow up with answers after the fact. And I'll be sharing my email here. So many of you already have it, but we can continue this conversation via email or have separate phone calls scheduled. So if you don't know who I am, my name is Misha Ide, and I'm here with the Washington State Department of Agriculture in our Regional Markets program. You're hearing a little bit from Ivy Fox, who's my colleague, also in the same program. My title is a Small Farm Direct Marketing Specialist, which is kind of a fancy way of saying I'm a bit of a concierge. And I work with people, most of you probably are small farms or direct marketing farms. So you sell your product direct to your end user. And so we help folks like you get access to resources. I'll talk a little bit more about what we do there, but I did want to put my contact information in this slide here. All of this will be emailed to you probably in a few days. So don't feel like you have to take copious notes right now. We're also going to have a presentation from Chloe Johnson, who is a staff attorney at Farm Commons. We've got some general contact information down below, but I wanted to make you all aware that Farm Commons has an amazing array of resources that's all things legal for farmers. And I think their membership is something like $100 a year. They have a lot of free resources, and then they have some that are for members only. It's really, really worth it. But also, you can get 30% off using this code for that we have for our stakeholders. So I definitely recommend that. And then we're going to hear from Cesar Sanchez from the Washington State Department of Labor and Industries, often called LNI, and he's going to talk about the Farm Internship Program. And so a little bit about regional markets. I mentioned that I'm doing work with small farm direct marketing folks, and then we have a farm to school program. We have meat and poultry assistance, and we have local food system infrastructure grants and technical assistance. So basically, our goal is to support farmers, ranchers, and small business producers that are using Washington ingredients access markets that are the right fit for their products and their scale. And we have a variety of ways we do that. So we do a lot of one-on-one assistance and technical support. We do regulatory guidance, do a lot of resource sharing and connecting. So if you aren't familiar with us yet, many of you are probably getting my emails, which is maybe how you found out about this workshop, which is great. But see me after or shoot me an email after if you want to learn more about how we can help you. And really quickly, there's a couple upcoming workshops I wanted to let you know about. Tomorrow, we're going to have the WA Meetup Quarterly All Call. So for anybody who is a rancher, farmer with meat, any meat, or if you are in the food system and you are interested in meat, you're welcome to join. We're going to have a presentation from our state veterinarian about avian influenza, and there's going to be other topics covered as well. And then in a couple weeks, Ivy and another colleague, Galen, are leading a workshop designing a wash pack with produce safety in mind. And that will be also offered with Spanish interpretation. And that is it for me. So now, Chloe, go ahead and take it away.
Okay, guys, just give me one moment to set up my screen.
I'm going to just make one more announcement for folks that may have not heard it. Si necesita un intérprete, haga clic en el icono global de la pantalla. Si tienes una pregunta sobre eso, hay un chat también y podemos ayudar.
All right, thank you. All right, my slides showing? Does it look good? Okay, great. I am really happy to be here today. I am Chloe Johnson from Farm Commons, and today I'm going to present on employment law basics for farms. And my hope is that at the end of our time together today, you understand, or at least have a better understanding of basic legal issues behind employment law on farms. So that's going to include classifying workers as employees versus independent contractors versus interns versus volunteers, and then what happens if those workers are considered to be employees, what obligations you have to those folks. We have about 45 minutes together. I'm going to reserve some time at the end for questions. I'm not going to be able to answer all of your questions. I do not practice in Washington. And I have a little bit of Washington specific information, but I'm also glad Caesar's here to answer some questions, at least about the internship program. Yeah, so that's a brief overview. Before we get into the nitty gritty, I want to tell you a little bit about Farm Commons itself. So we are a 501c3 nonprofit organization. Our mission is here on the slide. It is to empower agricultural communities to address their uh, own legal vulnerabilities within an ecosystem of support. And we, as Farm Commons, our members and our partners, we all strive to form this ecosystem of support. We do that primarily by creating and delivering educational material like today's program. We spend a lot of our time doing pretty extensive research and developing what we hope are plain language educational materials that make sense both to farmers and the service providers with whom they work. So on our website and available to our members, we have many long form written guides, models, checklists, templates, tutorials, entire workshop series, as well as these one-off webinars that we do with our partners. And all of these things come together to help us support farmers in making critical decisions about how to address the diversity of legal issues they encounter. And an important part of our work is leadership development. We deeply believe that the farm and ranch community is the best source of solutions for the legal challenges that the farm and ranch community face. So we focus on trying to help farmers and ranchers understand their option within the legal rules and assess their own risk tolerance around some of the legal rules, and then support them in making their own decisions and coming up with their own solutions, and then providing environments where they can share those solutions with their peers and talk to them about how to handle some of these legal issues. Now, today we're talking about employment law. That is a favorite area of law for Farm Commons. We also deal with business formation, zoning, insurance, food safety liability insurance, and a few other areas of law. And I personally am Chloe Johnson. I've said that, but I live in North Carolina, and I have farmed. I have practiced as an attorney helping farmers form businesses and with some real estate issues. And yeah, now I'm happy to bring both of those experiences together at Farm Commons and do this educational work. Now let's look at a little bit clearer of a roadmap of where we'll be going today. We're going to start with worker classification, and then we'll move into those employment law obligations. So you see here, we'll start with independent contractors, move on to interns, apprentices, and volunteers. And then once we realize that most people are going to be employees, we'll turn to what that means for you all as farm business owners. All right, so I kind of just gave this away a little bit, but today's key knowledge point, and the thing we're going to keep coming back to throughout the webinar, is that almost everyone who does work on a farm is going to be correctly and legally classified as an employee. That means that farms who have workers that they treat as something other than an employee, so the volunteers, the interns, the independent contractors, if those folks work with farms, there's going to be, that farm is going to be exposed to some legal risk. So I'm here today to talk about that legal risk and what that might entail. And I want to be clear that on this point, the law is really, really clear. There's not a lot of wiggle room here. There are really two basic options for farm workers as an employee or an independent contractor. And as you'll hear later, there are special programs for internships, and there are some exceptions, and we'll talk about those. But in general, you're going to either have employees or independent contractors. And so we're going to start with independent contractors because we can define that and kind of get it out of the way before we talk about what employees are owed. So the slide here talks about the general criteria for independent contractors. This is federal rules and generally how states handle defining an independent contractor. So we have people who come to the job and they bring their own tools. They set their own schedule. They themselves control how the task is accomplished. And they have an opportunity to make a profit depending on how they use their time, as long as their equipment doesn't break, and if they've set their rate at a competitive rate that will help them make some money. And then lastly, this person typically provides the service they're providing to the farm to other people as well. Okay, so like I said, this isn't specific to Washington, but I've read through Washington's and they really focus on control, but they're going to, all these factors are going to play in favor of a contractor in Washington as well. And the factor of control, that's going to mean that the employer or the farm owner isn't going to have the right to tell the independent contractor how to do the job, give them instructions, or tell them when to show up, right? There can be some back and forth about when is convenient for both parties, but you don't tell an independent contractor, you need to be here at 7 a.m. and you can't leave until 4 because they're more independent than that. They get to make those decisions themselves. So now we're going to run this through a scenario so we can kind of see how this plays out on farms. And if you think that you can meet these criteria, if you might have independent contractors for people other than folks who come out and maybe do custom farming, construction, or repair on your farm, if you are thinking that, you're going to really need to do additional research, make sure you're meeting these criteria and that you're paying your folks correctly so you can minimize that risk. And if the Washington Wage Division says that, yes, this is a solid independent contractor position, it is possible that the IRS on the federal level could disagree. So you have to research both the Washington and the federal rules to be clear. And you can always call agencies and talk to them to get an answer on this if you need that certainty. Okay, so our example, we're going to talk about Farmer May. Farmer May has a row crop operation, and in the fall, she works with a neighbor farmer to harvest her crop. Her neighbor owns their own combine, and they do custom harvest for a few other farmers in the region. And they end up coordinating this harvest schedule as they're able to and as it works with the farms that they work with. May pays in cash in return. All right, so if we're thinking about this person, the question is, would this person meet the criteria of an independent contractor? The answer in this case is yes. This person would. Remember, they have their own combine. They bring it to the farm, May's farm. They set their own schedule. May isn't going to come up and tell them how to operate their equipment. And if they're efficient and their equipment doesn't break, and they set their rates well, they're going to make money. And of course, Farmer May can make some requests, they can talk about how the work's going to be done, but Farmer May is not going to be in control of how that work is done. A very common scenario where you do have independent contractors are with construction and repair jobs. So you hire someone to repair your plumbing or fix your pipes or build you a shed on the farm. In those cases, you are hiring an independent contractor. But other things that are directly connected to the work of the farm business, that is unlikely to meet the independent contractor criteria. Okay, but if you are in Farmer May's position and you do have an independent contractor, what does this mean for you? Well, it means you don't have to worry about employment laws and all the obligations that come with them. It's like in your home, when you have a plumber come and fix your broken pipes, you're not worried about whether you've met the minimum wage requirement for that plumber. You just pay the fee that's set or you all agreed on, the work is done, and you both go on your way. Now, as a business on an accounting note, and many of you probably know this, if you pay an independent contractor more than $600 a year, you're going to issue them a Form 1099 at the end of that year, but that is going to be the last of your duties. You don't have to be wrapped up with them in any other way. But as I said before, this kind of work relationship is not what most farms need to actually get work done. And that is just because most farmers need workers who are going to routinely come milk the cows, weed the vegetables, get products sold, and other just everyday tasks that make up farm work. And for the most part, farmers are going to need these tasks to be done according to their specifications and on their schedule. You need people to show up at the same time so you can attack these things in an efficient manner. And you need to know how long they're going to be there during the day. So that gives typically workers that are there to make sure the farm work gets done are going to be employees. Okay, let me see if I can even get to the chat box, but I would like to know just kind of generally if this is reflective of what you all have experienced in your working life, either as an employer or an employee, or if you've had different information or maybe different experiences. I'm just going to give you, see one moment, see if anything comes in the chat box.
I'm not seeing anything yet, Chloe. Oh, there's a hand.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yes, not Misha.
Hi, this is Diane Fish. Can you hear me?
hi,
Yes,
Diane.
hi.
So one of the things that one farmer had done is that they had, quote unquote, hired one of their interns to do, or they had leased them some ground to do their own project, and then they had they had rented the equipment, so they had basically created an opportunity for a beginning farmer who was apprenticing on their farm, but also working on building up like a resume by having to have a Schedule F to fill out. And so they had basically encouraged them to get a business license, and they had them do some quote unquote custom farming so that they could 1099 them, so that they would have something to put on their Schedule F, because that is an important part of getting access to USDA programs eventually. Is that something that falls under, I mean, in that circumstance, the person set their own hours. They were either leasing or renting tools, so they were quote unquote using their own tools. Does that fall under that? And it was, I mean, it's kind of an artifice, but it really did give them something to put on the Schedule F.
Right. Well, in a situation like that, and I mean, I can't say for sure, but especially where the farmer is making their own decisions about that plot, at least that they're going to be reporting on their Schedule F, they're filing their own taxes. Um, that that seems like it would work. I'm not sure what the arrangement there is, why the essentially the landowner farmer needs to pay that person. That can get a little tricky, but a lot of what you described seem to meet that criteria. You also indicated they may still be working on the other farm under the direction of the landowner farmer employer, and that payment would still need to be that those payments, those obligations would all still need to be as an employee. This can get so tricky so quickly. I saw quite a few other questions come into the chat box. And so there's a question about stipends. I don't know if that relates to the internship program, but we will talk about that. And then there's some questions about liability if independent contractors are using the farm's tools or equipment. And that's really going to be a question that's too specific to circumstances for me to really be able to answer. I can say across the board that doesn't, it may expose you to more potential liabilities, but it doesn't mean you're necessarily going to be liable. Okay, let me move on and we will, if I didn't answer any of those sufficiently, we'll hopefully get to them at the end. But I do want to mention enforcement because I would not be surprised, and I've heard many times that um, there are that people have experiences with farms who hire almost exclusively independent contractors. Personally, I know a lot of farms that in the beginning of their business, they hire independent contractors before they can, figure out how to put everybody on payroll and afford those extra expenses. And they just take on the risk of doing that for the first couple of years. So why does this happen? How do people get away with it? This is really just about enforcement. How do these rules actually get enforced, right? I mean, I can tell you what the rules are, but it's not going to be 100% enforcement out there. So usually what happens when these issues come to the forefront is a person is let go from their job and ends up filing unemployment insurance. And as a part of filing that claim, the unemployment insurance division in the state is going to start asking questions. The office is going to try to figure out if you had an employee, and thus, if you did, if you should have been paying into the unemployment insurance system. So that's a really common way for this to kind of come to a head. And less commonly, though, it can happen, and there's certainly a pathway for this. The workers themselves may file a complaint with L&I or the IRS that they were misclassified. And this usually happens when a worker classified or misclassified as an independent contractor doesn't realize the tax implications of that. So when they are given that 1099, that means no taxes were withheld from their paycheck. So then when they file their taxes the following year, many times people can be stuck with tax bills running into the thousands of dollars. So you can imagine at that point, if someone is shocked, did not understand that was going to happen, and now they owe the IRS thousands of dollars, they could be a little upset. And a person who's upset may look for recourse like filing a complaint. Okay, so whereas it doesn't always get enforced, and many farms do use independent contractors, maybe in cases where they shouldn't be using them, there is this risk that there's a report to the state or to the IRS, and then there can be consequences, including financial penalties. Okay, so hopefully I at least a little bit cleared up the legal definition of independent contractor. So now we're going to move towards the definition of an employee, right? If I say most people who work on a farm are an employee, then what does that mean? Now, the law says to employ someone is to permit someone to do the work of of one work of one. My notes are incorrect. The for-profit business. So you permit someone to do the work of a for-profit business. Okay, so that's kind of interesting. It's not saying you employ someone. To employ someone is to put out a job application, you do the interviews, you hire them, and then you train them. That's what we think of typically in employment situations, right? It just says you permit that person to do the work of your for-profit business. And at that point, you've employed someone. Okay, maybe now you're thinking, well, what about interns and volunteers? Okay, so for a worker to be a legal intern, right? So lots of people are called interns that work on farms, but there are, unsurprisingly, legal criteria that interns have to meet. Okay, and this, again, this slide is the general slide for all of the US. There is a Washington-specific farm internship program, which you're going to hear more about. I have a brief slide on it, but I'm not going to spend much time because Caesar's going to know a lot more than I do about that. But generally, interns or apprentices are involved in a formal education program. So the most obvious example would be, a college program where they're doing learning about the thing that they're interning in year round. And that the internship, the work that they are asked to do in the internship or the apprenticeship gives them significant, broadly applicable educational benefit, right? Which wouldn't just be getting the work done on your specific farm. They would be more learning about farming in general. You would have to spend a lot of time on just education, not just getting the work of the farm done. Also, an intern and apprentice, in order to be legally classified as such, cannot displace a current employee. Okay, all of these are really hard to meet. And even the first one, if they're involved as intern or apprentice is involved in a formal education program, they're likely only to be available, say, June through August, when school is typically out. And then to meet the second criteria, you have to spend time to train them broadly, and you might start realizing you might be wasting your time with this classification of worker. And if you don't suffer, right, if you're not displacing other employees with them, then why do you have them come at all? Interns are typically pretty unhelpful, right? Interns go somewhere to work to get help, to get into a field and to learn about it. So a farm wanting to do an internship is going to need to be truly committed to educating the next generation of farmers to be able to offer them. Okay, but Washington has a specific farm internship program that does allow people to intern on farms. You're going to hear more about this later. And they are exempt from a lot of the employment law obligations we're going to be talking about. And this is a program that you must apply to and be accepted into. And again, Caesar is going to talk about that later, so you can get all the information you need about that. But that's great. That is a state program. So before I was talking about very general requirements, federal and across the U.S., but your state can have a particular program, which is great. And I'm glad Washington does. Okay. For now, that's all about internships. Let's move on to volunteers and relatives and friends. So remember how employing someone means to permit them to do the work of a for-profit farm. That's why volunteers aren't possible. That's a legal principle, and that's why volunteers are not legal in for-profit businesses. Because legally speaking, volunteers are people who give their time to charity, nonprofit organizations, or governments in order to benefit humanity. So let's talk about how this could play out on a farm. Say there is a farmer named January, and they have a CSA operation. Some of their customers prefer to help out the farm by packing up boxes or doing marketing rather than pay cash for their share. And of course, Farmer January really appreciates this help and sets up a program to earn one's CSA share through labor. You've probably seen many farms who do this. And I'm here to tell you these folks who are doing this work share are actually legally likely employees. And in that case, this farmer from January is going to need to consider her obligations under the law. And we're about to talk about the obligations. We're just going to run through a few examples so we can really hammer this principle home. Okay, so we'll talk about Farmer August next. Farmer August has a dairy operation. And his brother used to work with him, but recently left to pursue a different career. So August is stuck. He needs help. He talks to his sister, and they arrange for his nephew to come over after school to help out for a few hours every day. In this case as well, just as with June, August's nephew is very likely an employee. Okay, now I have a scenario for you. We have another farmer, Farmer July. July has a U-pick farm. The farm is formed as a limited liability company. Folks come out to pick their own strawberries, blueberries, and blackberries throughout the season. And July is listening to us talk about the definition of to employ and starts getting a little anxious and wondering, are my U-pick or the people who come out and pick on my U-pick farm, are they my employees? Are they doing the work of my for-profit business? Am I supposed to be paying them and doing all these other things for the privilege of picking their own berries? This is the question. Is she permitting them to do the work of her for-profit business? You may be thinking, no, they're not doing the work of the U-pick operation, right? They're customers of the berry picking experience. And you're absolutely on the right track if that's what you were thinking, because these folks are not doing the work of a for-profit business. And we use this example to kind of try to find that line of when people are and when people aren't doing the work of a for-profit business for free. So when we think of a U-pick operation, the work of that operation is to set the scene, set the environment for people to come and pick. So the work of the operation is in growing the berries. And then while the U-pick season is going on, providing parking, pails for people to put their berries in, taking their money, advertising the business, these types of things. If no one comes to pick at a U-pick, it's just a failing U-pick farm. If the farm converts its business plan to start picking berries and selling them, then that's another story. Those folks are going to come and pick those berries sold by the farm itself. That would be the work of the for-profit business. Okay, so hopefully all these examples have helped you understand that most often you're going to be looking at an employee, but there are times that you're not. You can certainly have customers come to the farm. You can have workshops on your farm and have people come and participate in those workshops. And that does not, even if they're learning how to turn compost or learning how to plant, and they're planting some of your plants, that doesn't mean that they're doing the work of your for-profit farm. So it's not always true. It's just most often true. Okay, so I wanted to, there are opportunities in Washington for volunteers and interns on farms. There's a volunteer program for young high school students. There's an apprenticeship program, but it requires so much. There's an internship program. There's the true internship, the global internship that we were talking about. And there isn't a family farm exemption for some of the employment law obligations that we'll talk about. But otherwise, you have employees. And if you have an employee, you might be wondering what it is you have to do now. Because once you have an employee, employment laws apply. And employment laws vary by state. Um, and we do have employment laws, like a fact sheet, a handout for each state on our website. It covers things like we'll talk about today. When is minimum wage required? When is overtime required? What about workers' compensation and unemployment insurance? These are some of the main topics when you start talking about employment law obligations. Knowing what these obligations are is going to be essential to reducing your legal vulnerability as a farm business owner who employs some folks. But employment law is quite vast. It's more than the, what is this, 4 elements we're going to be talking about today. For example, there's rules about discrimination, when and how often you have to pay wages, meal and rest breaks that you have to provide throughout the day. Rules about ages and times of day in which youths can work. I mean, we could spend a long time on farm employment law. But today we're just going to these few fundamental issues to get you started. We do have an advanced employment law workshop on our website that you can do at your own pace. If you want to get more into the weeds around some of these obligations. Okay. The first place to start when you're talking about employment law obligations is how much you have to pay. What is the minimum wage in your state, and does that apply to farmers? Now, depending on the state, some farms do have to pay a minimum wage, the minimum wage of the state, and some farms don't. It's actually quite varied across the United States right now. And a lot of times this could be a moot point. In a lot of places, in order to attract a qualified workforce, most farms are going to need to offer well above the minimum wage, which, unlike Washington, in most states is still $7.25 an hour. So in those states, they're going to have to offer more than that to get people to work there. Now, as you all know, likely know, the minimum wage in Washington does apply to farms and is currently $16.16 an hour. I believe it's on the next slide. So that might be more of a stretch for some farms. Okay, so I wanted to give, well, we typically do give just kind of a survey of some states across the US. And Washington was already on our list because you guys do things a little bit differently. So there's a couple of states that require minimum wage for all farm workers, namely Washington, California, Colorado. And then there's some states that don't require a minimum wage until the farm is of a certain size, like Illinois, or they have a certain number of employees. And the rule here about Illinois, I don't think anybody in this webinar is from Illinois, but this isn't a hard and fast rule, what we have on the slide. It's kind of, it's all dependent on this 500 man day rule, which is a way of determining when a farm starts hiring a lot of people. But it's a pretty complicated way of calculating that. So just to like give you a sense of how some states do it and the threshold at which a minimum wage would kick in, we say it's generally when you have about 6 to 7 full-time employees. Okay, so that's the way some states do it. Then other states, like Montana, use a gross annual sales threshold. So if you make over a certain amount in Montana, you have a certain amount of minimum, you have to meet the state minimum wage, but if your gross sales are less than that, then you don't. So there's a lot of different ways that this can be handled. But again, Washington at least makes it easy to know what your obligations are by having taken away those farm exemptions. Okay, overtime. This is the second employment law obligation we want to talk about. Now, in most states, overtime is not owed to a farm employee. unless you assign non-agricultural labor. So once again, Washington, you're in the, we'll call it the vanguard of folks who are removing these farm worker exemptions from some of these employment law protections. And you do have to have overtime for employees. And we're already at the mark of at 40 hours a week. It was phased in over a number of years. And California is the same, and Hawaii for larger farms are the same. And there's actually a good number of other states that have overtime requirements just at different thresholds, like it kicks in at different times. There's some of these states are still phasing in their overtime rules, like New York. They're on a really long timeline. And then others, let's see, like Maryland, I think it's not being phased in, but it's always after 60 hours in a week, you have to pay overtime. So it can vary. Okay, so I did say, and this one, because you all are already obligated to pay overtime, this distinction isn't going to have as much immediate impact on your employment obligation decisions, but it is important to understand that there is this difference between what is considered agricultural labor and non-agricultural labor throughout employment law. And often we'll say post-harvest activities in some states are non-agricultural labor, but not most states. But then things like selling off-site and that kind of thing can be considered non-agricultural labor. Okay, now when we're considering farming, we have to consider that injuries are more likely than in some other of industries. And injuries and the costs that come with injuries are another source of for farms, it's for employment law obligations or employment law rules to kind of come to a head and cause an issue for a farm. Generally, work-related injuries are managed in the U.S. through workers' compensation, the workers' compensation program. And once again, across the U.S., many farms are exempt from the requirement to purchase workers' compensation for employees, but in Washington, that is not true. You do have to purchase workers' compensation for your employees. Now, many business owners are going to see or tend to see workers' compensation as a regulatory obligation, which many times it is. But farmers sometimes don't realize that workers' compensation was designed to protect businesses and the business owner from lawsuits from the worker that got injured. So not only does the worker compensation system work as insurance that will cover medical bills for injured workers, it's also true that workers who have workers' compensation available to them are prohibited from suing the business owner for the injury. So for this reason, even in states where it isn't a requirement, some farmers choose to opt into the workers' compensation program or buy a separate workers' compensation or employee injury liability insurance premium rider or policy. Okay, hiring an employee in Washington. Now, L&I has a lot of great resources on their website, and I have a few links that I found really helpful that I thought you would all also find helpful. So I'll drop those in the chat when I'm not actively talking because I cannot do two things at once. But I wanted to give you just kind of at least some tips about what you need to do with these different agencies if you are to hire an employee. So there is this requirement if you have a business license to indicate that you are hiring an employee and update one. If you already have one, you have to update that. Or as you're getting a business license, you want to indicate that. You need to go to the Employment Security Department and secure your state unemployment insurance. Uh, L&I has a payroll estimator that can help you calculate how much it's going to cost to have put your employees on payroll. And I did mention this, that there are other obligations like meal and rest breaks that you do have to provide throughout the day, certain time increments after people have worked for a certain number of hours. So you do want to pay attention to those obligations as well. Okay. This is just a little more information about Farm Commons itself. If you are interested in membership, and I'm going to have that coupon code available again in just one moment, but we do have a program that is geared towards producers that goes over 5 weeks called Discovering Resilience. And in that, we'll talk about employment law, but all of the other areas of law that Farm Commons covers as well. And you'll get out of that practice around 10 best practices for legal resilience. So this can be a very helpful program especially if you're just starting a business and want to know what you have to do legally. And as I said, we have tons of resources on our website that you should take advantage of. And if you want to do that, here, once again, is that coupon code that you can use that is good for a few more months. And then it may continue, if we continue our relationship with the Department of Ag, that coupon may continue to be good for even longer. Okay, so I can take some questions.
And I will double check the coupon code because it's slightly different than the one that I think I had from Benita. So we'll make sure when we send the follow-up email that we have the right code in there.
Thank you for catching that, Misha. I very well may have done a little typo. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and then I might be able to answer some questions.
Okay. Well, thank you for having me today, Misha. So today I'll be talking about the agricultural employment standards and farm employment. But before I begin, I just want to introduce myself. My name is Cesar Sanchez with the Department of Labor and Industries. Excuse me, specifically with the Farm Labor Unit, doing farm labor contractor on-site visits, compliance reviews. But I also work with the Farm Internship program, which is what I'll talk a little bit about today. I'll also go over the farm labor contractor portion since we're talking about farm employment, and I just think it's something important for farmers to have on hand, or in case you do decide to go that route to hire additional employment on your farm. So a little bit of the presentation overview. So we'll be talking about the agricultural employment standards today, which we'll go over the Minimum Wage Act, record keeping, pay statements, meal and rest periods. I'll talk a little bit about farm labor contractors. I'll have a slide about volunteers and the farm internship program at the end, which is a little more detailed. So some of the information I realize might be duplicate to what Chloe mentioned today, but I think it's great information regardless. But I'll try to skim over that a little bit quicker just to get through all these slides today. Feel free to drop your questions in the chat. We'll probably just have the Q&A session like Chloe did at the very end. But yeah, we'll go ahead and get started. So the Minimum Wage Act, which is chapter 49.46 RCW, it provides protections to workers that can include minimum wage, tips and service charges, paid sick leave, overtime, which is over 40 hours per work week, and the protection against retaliation for exercising the above rights. It does apply to most employees, except those who are specifically exempt from the law. And we do have links at the very bottom, which is administrative policies that we have for the public via our website. I won't be going over them today, but we'll possibly be sending these slides over, and you guys are welcome to look through those on your own time. So the minimum wage, so here's a little repeat of what Chloe mentioned. So employers must pay all their employees at least minimum wage here in Washington State for every hour worked. And right now it's the $16.66 for 2025. If they're under 16 years old, they can be paid 85% of the minimum wage, which is approximately 14 and 16 cents. Employees who are paid piece rate wages, which is based on the worker's productivity, must earn at least a minimum wage for all their hours worked and the rest breaks included. And employers must pay workers an agreed wage or the minimum wage, whichever is greater. So employees must be earning at least a minimum wage in any job that includes agriculture or any other type of work there. So it's very important to keep record keeping. I know you guys mentioned a few things. There was a few comments about record keeping, specifically just having something to back yourselves up when it comes to, I forgot what we were talking about, but just something written, right? So something important to keep is records for your employees. So they must be kept at least 3 years here in Washington State. That includes the name, address, and occupation of the employee, dates of employment, rate or rates of pay, amount paid to the worker, hours worked. And these employment records must be available upon request by an employee within a reasonable time. So 3 years in case any wage claims come up or whatever the case may be. Usually that's how long you must keep them in your files. Of course, itemized pay statements. So if you are paying your employees, they are entitled to the itemized pay statements. So at the time wages are paid, agricultural labor laws require that each agricultural employee receive an itemized statement. This is due to the RCW 49.30.020. So essentially what the pay statement has to include is the pay basis in hours or days worked. There must be the applicable rates or rates of pay. When it comes to piece rate, there's piece rate active time, piece rate downtime, hourly rates, overtime rates, rest periods. So the piece time rates usually applies to orchards, people who are working on an hour or a piece rate basis. But if you have questions about that, you can always send us an email or give us a call. It also must include the gross pay and all deductions for that respective pay period. And wages, of course, must be paid on a monthly basis or on a regular scheduled payday. So at least one time a month, they should be receiving some sort of itemized pay statement.
Caesar, there's a question, if you don't mind, about that piece rate.
Oh,
So if folks are paying piece rate, does the overtime rule, how does that come into effect?
It does potentially come in. It just really depends on the amount of time that they work. So essentially, what we look at is how much they earned through that time period, let's just say a week. And in order to figure that out, you essentially have to figure out how much the employee earned with that piece rate, and then how many hours they worked. And you basically figure out, if there's some sort of well, let's just say they worked over the 40 hours during the piece rate, but they made less than the minimum wage, then it's possible that the overtime may apply. Yeah, so it has to do with quite a few things. I think we look at, like I said, the hours that they work and then how much they earn for the week or for the week for the 40 hours. But yeah, if there's a specific example that you guys have, we usually look at cases in a case by case basis. That way we can also go over with you whether they do, get that overtime or not. I hope that answers the question. It's a little gray, but it's case by case basis, definitely. Um, so the rest period requirements. So Chloe did mention that when you do have employees, you must give them those meal and rest periods. So as far as the rest periods, they should be receiving at least 10 minutes for every 4 hours of work. Rest periods are required for employees to take no later than 3 hours and 50 minutes into the shift. So anytime before that, the 10 minutes must be given to the employee. These cannot be waived or interrupted. Agricultural piece rate workers must be paid separately for the rest periods. Separate payment is based on the regular rate of pay or minimum wage, whichever is greater. So when it comes to piece rate workers, usually it's just a separate pay on the pay stub. So you'll just see that your rest period was paid on that stub. Of course, when it comes to hourly, those rest periods are included in the hours that you work. So those are always paid for. at the very end. So as far as the meal periods, they're a little bit different. They're not usually required to be paid, but it must be paid if the employee is not relieved from those work duties. There's a 30-minute meal period requirement for every 5 hours that they work, and employees must receive an additional 30-minute meal period if they work 11 hours or more. Employees can choose to waive their meal period if the employer agrees to it, but it must be at the will of an employee. The employee can request their meal periods at any given time. And we always recommend obtaining a written waiver request from each employee, usually in their native language or the language they understand. But if at some later date the employee doesn't or they wish to receive their meal periods again, then the agreement would no longer be in effect. So that's one of the things that's different with the rest and meal periods. Rest periods you cannot waive, but these meal periods you can if and we always, like I said, recommend obtaining a written waiver, and that's a little bit that Chloe went over with those waiver requests when it came to volunteers, right? So documentation is always super important when it comes to these type of investigations or just let's say there was a complaint filed where that's the first thing we asked, was there anything written? Do you have anything saying that this employee didn't want their meal periods? So it's just something important to keep in mind when not providing these meal periods, or if you decide to go this route.
Caesar, there's a question about those breaks. Do they need to be a fixed 10 minutes or can they be broken up into like 2 5-minute breaks, for example?
Typically it would be the 10 minutes all at once. Let's say they're 5 minutes into their break and then something urgent comes up and they have to go back into the field. That's okay, they can go back in there, but as long as they can return and finish off their last 5 minutes. But we always encourage to at least keep it within the 4 hour time frame. So let's say they work just 4 hours in the morning, at least the 10 minutes should happen within those 4 hours. So farm employment. So that's a little bit about the agricultural employment standards. I didn't want to get into deep with that since Chloe did do a great job explaining some of the or just employment standards in general when it came to Washington State. But I wanted to focus a little bit more on the farm employment. So first of all, thank you, Chloe, for sharing the independent contractor information. I think that's super important when it comes to farmers because that is one of the routes that they take when hiring additional workers or just help on the farm in general. But there are different ways to get that type of help here in Washington State, and one of them being farm labor contractors, and then the farm internship program, which I said I'll talk about a little bit more at the end. But I'm going to start talking about the farm labor contractor portion of it, just in case you decide to go that route. And it's not very common, I think, with smaller farms, but regardless, it's an option in case you decide to go that route. But there's quite a few requirements when hiring a farm labor contractor. So who is considered an agricultural worker under FLICA or the Farm Labor Contractor Act? So an agriculture worker includes any individual who's employed on a farm and performs any of the following activities, which is cultivating soil and harvesting any agricultural or horticultural commodity, or including farm operations, which is management, conservation, improvement, or maintenance of a farm, packaging and commercial canning of any agricultural or horticultural commodity, and oysters, cultivating, raising, harvesting, and processing. So, if an agricultural or a worker is doing any of these activities, they're typically considered an agricultural worker. Okay, so the Farm Labor Contractor Act is RCW 1930, and the WAC is 296310. And it does provide the following definitions. So the agricultural employer would be any person who's engaged in agricultural activity. That includes farm labor, which is the growing, producing, harvesting of product, forestation, reforestation, and Christmas tree farming. A farm labor contractor is any person or their agent or subcontractor who, for a fee, performs any of the 6 farm labor contractor activities, which is what I'll go over here in the next slide. And then the agricultural employee is just any person who renders personal services to or under the direction of an agricultural employer in connection of the agricultural employer's agricultural activity. That's a tongue twister there. So basically, any person who renders their services to an agricultural employer in regards to their agricultural activity. So the six, um, I guess any of the following is what you would consider a farm labor contractor. So a farm labor contractor is any person or entity who, for a fee, does any of these. They recruit employees, solicit, hire, they supply employees, employ them, transport them, workers for farms and other agricultural work. So if any of these duties, if any person or entity is doing these duties and they're being paid for it, then it would more likely become a farm labor contractor. And they do have to be licensed to do something like that. And something I like to compare it to is construction contracting. So construction contractors have their own crews that they take to different locations to do jobs. This is similar, just in the agricultural world. This person has a group who they take to do jobs at different entities, usually farms, orchards, or out on the field, out in the mountains, doing forestation, reforestation work. So farm labor contracting industries. So farm and nursery labor, which is growing, producing, harvesting farms, which is what I mentioned earlier. Forestation is any planting, transplanting, tubing, pre-commercial thinning, and thinning of trees and seedlings. Or Christmas tree harvest is some of the activities we consider farm labor contracting. So where are we located on the internet? So if you go into our website, LNI, we have a tab which is called Farm Labor Contractor Licensing. Under that, you can click Verify a Farm Labor Contractor. I kind of wanted to go over with you guys. Is it okay if I jump in there?
We're running a little late because we had some tech
Okay.
issues. I don't think there's probably a whole lot of farmers on this call that'll use this, but if you are one of those folks that is interested, will you please let us know in the chat and we'll follow up with everyone, but we'll make sure you guys get the information you need specifically for that. If you don't mind, Caesar, I'm
Yeah,
sorry about that.
that's okay. That's perfect. Yeah, basically, if you follow that link or just click on verify a farm labor contractor, what you want to make sure is that these people are licensed through Washington State. That helps with you as far as liability goes, payment issues. These farm labor contractors usually take care of the payments when it comes to the workers. So you're basically just paying this farm labor contractor to do the labor for you. So if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. We have an inbox here at esfarmlabor@lni.wa.gov for general questions, not just farm labor unit, but just general agricultural questions. You're welcome to send us through that email. All right, moving forward. So I have this one slide about volunteers. I know that Chloe went over this quite a bit, but a volunteer freely gives their time and talents without expectation of pay. And a volunteer can work in educational, charitable, religious, state or local government, or nonprofit organization. But as we mentioned, under the law, volunteering is not allowed for a for-profit business. And volunteers can be paid a stipend or nominal fee. However, if they're paid for their services beyond reimbursement for expenses, reasonable benefits, or a nominal fee, they're employees and not volunteers. So there's just a gray area there when it comes to payment to volunteers, but the general consensus is that volunteers just not allowed for those for-profit business. Okay, so the farm internship program. So I'll talk about the program a little bit more in detail on how to apply. So that'll be the next few slides here. But essentially, the Farm Internship Program started in 2011, so more than 10 years now, as a pilot project just to allow people to learn about farming in the state of Washington. It is the first of its kind here in the United States, actually, which allows interns to work on small farms throughout the state. It has become permanent now and statewide, which is great after 10 years of reports and making sure that everything went well. Looks like we finally got established, but the program is for farm interns to learn about farming practices and gain hands-on experience with farming activities. And interns participating in the program are exempt from the minimum wage requirements, and they're not technically required to be paid, but instead they receive education and experience about specific farming activities, and they are entitled to that workers' compensation or industrial insurance protections. Usually, participating farms offer some type of compensation, which can include a cash stipend, an hourly wage, room and board, and share of harvest, or a combination of all. Some of the requirements as a farm. So if you are trying to apply, typically farms with annual sales of less than 265,000 per year are eligible. The farm owner must participate in that everyday work and management of the farm, ideally with the owners working alongside those interns. So what we're looking for here is a one-on-one type of mentorship with the program. It's not just the intern working alone or just working with the employees. It really is more intimate, which is why the cap at 265. Uh, it's not too much, but I think it keeps us at a smaller farm range, just to be able to have those farmers working with the interns. The farms also have to use an approved educational curriculum, which is usually submitted with the application. Um, and if the farm employs more than one intern, the farm must employ at least one intern who has direct experience working as a migrant farm worker or whose parent or grandparent has direct experience working as a migrant farm worker. This requirement can be waived if the farm employs only one intern and does not receive any applications from other interns. This requirement, though, it was one of the new things that showed up when the program was permanent or just became permanent and statewide. Essentially, there was 19 of the counties, which are here listed below, that were included in that bill. And essentially, if they have interns, then at least one of the interns has to be of that migrant farm worker experience or has a parent or grandparent who has been a migrant farm worker. But for the other counties, they were essentially grandfathered into the program and don't really have to abide by this specific rule. Some of the requirements of being a participant, the farm must have no serious violations or outstanding penalties of the Minimum Wage Act, so they can't owe any money to any of the employees or interns, essentially usually employees, but they have to have no violations of workers' compensation. Everything must be paid up as far as the balance goes, and it does not create an unfair competitive labor cost advantage for the farm, doesn't depress wages of experienced workers, and of course, they cannot displace experienced workers and replace them with those interns. Workers' compensation coverage is required, as I mentioned, and usually that protects both the injured interns and the farmer's assets. So some of the things we mentioned earlier, the workers' compensation coverage is to protect both you as a farmer and your assets. And of course, the intern, in case they do get injured, they have some sort of protection. And the risk classification is based on the type of work that is performed on the farm. And that's usually determined through your account manager. Right now, Michael Ruiz, which we have his contact information here, he's usually the go-to person when it comes to the account manager information. He can usually determine what type of risk class, how much you'll be paying per hour. But essentially the rates range from 46 cents to $2 depending on the type of work. And that's something that I definitely encourage you, if you wish to apply, reach out to Michael Ruiz or just the workers' compensation unit and just let him know what you're trying to do. Usually with the farm internship program, there's reduced rates when it comes to workers' compensation. And that's one of the benefits of being a participant. It gives you just lower risk class rates or just the amount that you pay per hour for those interns. But at least it gives you the opportunity to give those interns that protection that they need as well. So more information, contact account manager or workers' compensation, or you can always reach out to me and we can connect you with somebody. All right, and another one of the requirements is that these participating farms can only hire up to 3 interns at a time. As I mentioned, they're exempt from the minimum wage and employment security premiums. They're not required to be paid, but instead of that wage, they receive that education, experience, and specific farming practices. And of course, they're still entitled to those insurance protections in case of an accident. They can have 3 interns at a time, but let's say one of the interns leaves midway through, or it's just a certain season you have them for, you can always replace them with another intern. But just at one time at a farm, there should be only 3 interns when it comes to the participating farm. Also, the farm has to provide an educational component to these interns. So, as I mentioned, they usually submit an educational curriculum, basically something similar to a syllabus or something you receive at a college or something like that, that basically outlines the different chapters or just a different type of work that they'll be doing throughout the year. This is supervised participation, so farmers are usually working with interns one-on-one, or maybe there's an employee with the farmer that they're all working together. So it's definitely supervised, and there has to be some sort of educational aspect to the internship itself. The curriculum of learning modules based on a bona fide educational vocational institutions, and they're designed to provide vocational knowledge and skills. So we're not asking for a specific type of curriculum. Typically, we let the farmer write their own curriculum, and we can talk about what they'll be really teaching, and whether it needs more details for us to get an idea of what they'll be teaching when they're out there. So, and I'll show an example here in a few slides on what that looks like. But before I move forward, I just wanted to make a distinction between an intern and an employee. So an intern can be any person who's a beginner or intermediate farmer. The tasks that they do are usually pretty diverse, not specific to like a repetitive type of task. The payment can be in education, housing, food, and/or stipends. They don't receive a wage usually, and they're entitled to workers' compensation protections, versus an employee who conducts the daily work. They do those repetitive type of tasks, such as picking weeds, and I mean, maybe that's part of the intern's job as well, but that's not all they'll be doing throughout the day. They're paid for their hours worked in the production side of the farm. Payment is usually per hour. They're provided W-2s at the end of the year. There's not necessarily any education guaranteed for these employees, but they are also entitled to those standard work protections, such as workers' compensation. Okay, so how to apply for the farm mentorship program. So as far as applying to the program, you will have to compile an application packet and send it to our email address, or you can send it to me directly, usually electronically and physically. This packet has to include a complete and signed farm internship program application, which is just a one-pager, basically outlining your business, UBI, workers' compensation account, so just general information about the business. And then, of course, we'll be asking how many interns you plan on having, and et cetera, et cetera. So it's just a one-page, pretty quick application. It's pretty self-explanatory. Another thing is the IRS Schedule F. So a Schedule F or 1040 or similar tax form that shows the how much they've earned throughout the year, gross, or I believe we go off the gross sales, or annual sales, sorry. But yeah, basically just showing that you're earning less than 265,000. That's what we're looking for when it comes to the Schedule F or similar tax form. And then you'll have to attach an educational curriculum, which, as I mentioned, usually has those weekly lesson plans. It does have some of those titles for supplemental reading, links to the curriculum if you have it online, or other reference materials. I've seen a combination of books to online classes to on the farm visits. So all that material is usually included within the educational curriculum. And we have more information on the Farm Internship Program website, on our LI webpage, which I'll add the links here once we're done presenting. Okay, and as far as, let's say you submitted and you're just waiting for us to return a answer. So usually we reply within 15 days or less, and the program will either accept or deny the application for the farm. The approved certificate, let's say you do get approved, usually has the name of the farm, duration of 12-month certificate, because it's only valid for 12 months from the time that you get approved. So let's say you got hired or you submitted it today in March, then you would be approved for 12 months until next March. So it also includes the number of interns you plan on hiring and wage rate, room and board, and other compensations. So this is a really quick example that I like to include. So basically, it looks something like this: an overview, some sort of structure of the internship, weekly discussions if you have any work-based learning. So usually people will submit something like this, farmers, and they'll include, what months they'll be working, what lessons. And of course, internships change, and I understand that farms don't necessarily go the way that you plan them because of weather changes or wherever the case may be. But we just want to get a good idea of what you'll be teaching, and that it looks like it's an educational opportunity for these people trying to learn about farming. And I guess before I move on, one of the things that I like to mention is that we go out there and talk to some of those interns as well. So it's not just getting approved and you're good to go. We're not going to come out and talk to you guys or the interns. We like to do annual visits just to talk to the interns and ask them how it's going for them as well. So there is a farm visit that's alongside the application. If you do have interns, we like to just go out and talk to you, meet you as a farmer, and then talk to your interns as well.
Caesar, I'm really sorry. I have to do a quick time check.
Yeah.
We've had quite a few people that have hopped off already, and it's great we can keep going because we're recording. I do also want to let everyone know that the interpreter did leave, so the Spanish language interpretation has stopped, but we will send slides. Hopefully, we will have our slides mostly translated into Spanish as well for follow-up. Thank you.
Thank you, Misha. Yeah, I'll hurry this along, but I just have a few more slides to go over with you guys. So the stipends portion, so as far as the educational nature of the farm internship program, wages aren't required for interns, as I mentioned. However, there's other type of compensation, which can include the cash stipend, an hourly wage, room and board, and share of harvest. But the participating farms usually don't have to provide those W-2s because these are stipends, not actual wages. But these wages, stipends, and other benefits can be taxable as income. I always tell farmers, interns who ask this question to consult with tax professionals because, I mean, I'm not a tax expert, but this is usually what we give out to all the farmers or interns who ask. Just try to talk to a tax professional and see if maybe some of these things do apply as taxable as income. I know it's really gray area, but um, tax professional is probably the best choice. That's basically all I have. Here's our map for all our agents. So as I mentioned, I work for the Farm Labor Unit. These are all farm labor contractor compliance investigators, and we're all over the state. Johnny Vargas was there in the middle of the map, and Union Gap. He's also part of the farm internship program as a coordinator. So you're welcome to reach out to him. But my information is there. Our general inbox information for the farm internship is at esfarminternship@lni.wa.gov. Feel free to reach out if you have any questions on the program, farm labor contractors, or just general employment standards in agriculture. But I believe that's all I have for you today.